Continuing our series, Learning to Lean In. We're on part 2 this week, and we're going to be working through the book of Exodus. We're going to be talking a lot about Moses. We're going to be talking about different instances in his story. Last week we talked really just at the beginning stages of Moses' story, and so this week we're going to continue to talk a little bit about Moses, but this is just chapter 2. And, just a little bit, I think at the end of chapter 1, in the beginning, or in the parts of chapter 2, as we begin to see how Moses' life begins to move forward at the age of 3 months, being born 3 months up until this point. And so this morning, though, if I could title it something, God is at work in the darkness. God is at work in the darkness. Now, I don't know if you guys, anybody in here afraid of the dark? Anybody? Okay. Nobody's afraid of the dark? Are you serious right now? Okay. All right, so, all right, we got like various little lights that we leave on all over the house, and you know, my son the other day is, don't you tell him I mentioned him. My son, stop, don't snitch. Snitches get, anyway, so, I wouldn't give her stitches. Anyway, so he's like, well, you know, I'm not scared of the dark, okay? You know, why do you have lights on, okay? So here's what happened, okay? You have kids, all right, and you get an animal, being scared of the dark, it's a little bit of a game changer, okay? So my son, he has this huge tub of Legos. Some of those Legos from my childhood, he likes to bring them out, put them on blanket, and he's like, if I put them on a blanket, they won't get anywhere. They won't get on the carpet. Baloney. All right, so they get all over the carpet, okay? So you've got to worry about Matchbox cars. You've got to worry about Barbie doll, like little plastic high heels that go on the Barbie doll's feet. You got to worry about those, okay? You got to worry about Legos. And then you get an animal. And you got to worry about animal stuff, okay? So when I say, are you scared of the dark? I'm not scared about what's going to come get me, or what's going to come find me. I'm scared of what I'm going to find. All right? There's nothing worse than waking up in the middle of the night, being a little disoriented, and you're walking through the house and stepping on something that causes like sharp pain to shoot up through your leg and suddenly wants to utter something out of your mouth. And you wonder, like, what is happening here? Come on. You guys are all looking at me like, really? So yes, we have little lights around that make sure that we don't step on anything, or make sure that nothing is going to be, my wife, my wife is scared of the dark, but that's okay. And you guys better not snitch on me. All right. And is that working good? Is that working right? Oh, plug it in. Oh no. Yes. Thank you, Todd. Awesome sauce. All right, so this is what Dwight L. Moody said, okay? Is there a cord back there? Perfect. All right, this is what Dwight L. Moody said. Moses spent 40 years in the king's palace thinking that he was somebody. Then he lived 40 years in the wilderness, finding out that without God, he was a nobody. Finally, he spent 40 more years discovering how a nobody with God can be a somebody. That is so significant. That is so significant. So in that vein, and understanding that, I'm going to talk to you guys just real briefly about the bleak climate of the culture of that time, and just what God started to do in what was the most dark and perilous of times. So these were the darkest days. These were the darkest days. I'm going to read some scripture to you guys real quick, and I'm going to be jumping through Exodus 1 and 2, and I'm going to read these scriptures really fast because I want to get to some points that I want you guys to grab this morning, and I want to encourage you to go and look at the story yourself and begin to study it so that you can gain more from what I'm saying on Sunday. So in Exodus 1, 12 through 22, in the New Living Translation, it says, "But the more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Israelites multiplied and spread, and the more alarmed the Egyptians became." Okay? They're pushing, they're pressuring, they're oppressing, and they just continue to grow. So the Egyptians worked the people of Israel without mercy. They made their lives bitter, forcing them to mix mortar and make bricks and do all the work of the fields. They were ruthless in all their demands. And Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, gave the order to the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, okay? When you help the Hebrew women as they give birth, watch as they deliver. If the baby is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live. But because the midwives feared God or revered God, respected God, knew, they had this understanding. Yes, it was fear, but they recognized that their God was the God. They refused to obey the king's orders. That's a big deal, okay? I want you to think about that for a minute. This is a man who later on would tell them, all the boys that are born, throw them into the Nile. This is the man that would say that. And so for them to defy that edict, to say, no, I'm not going to participate in that, that's a big deal. That is a big deal. So the king of Egypt called the midwives, all right, why have you done this, he demanded. Why have you allowed the boys to live? The Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, the midwives replied. They are more vigorous and have their babies so quickly that we cannot get there in time, okay? You know, earlier it said they feared God. Right here they're sharing another story. I don't know if they're trying to deceive the king or what. Maybe maybe the Israelites were really good at having babies. I'm not sure. So God was good to the midwives, and the Israelites continued to multiply, growing more and more powerful. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all of his people: throw every newborn Hebrew boy into the Nile River, but you may let the girls live. All right, so I'm just going to briefly talk about this for just a second. The climate of that time historically is horrible. It is horrible. We can't minimize this or sanitize this to some kind of folklore. I know that we've watched movies that have been made by DreamWorks, Prince of Egypt. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that. And it's a cool movie, but it does not capture in entirety the reality of what's going on here. And I know that for children, this is a horrific thing, that it takes years and years of their getting older and more mature to even begin to explain what's going on here. But this was an oppressor. This was genocide. Boys are born, throw them in the river. Why let the girls live? Because they can be used, because they can be sold, because we can use them to have children with. We can do whatever we want to with them. Historically speaking, the women in that time, girls in that time, had no significant value of any kind. They were used. They were abused. And so Pharaoh's like, let the girls live, kill the boys, because they won't be able to grow. They won't be able to multiply. Now, if we read the scriptures, the text is telling us they grew and grew and grew. They continued as families. The midwives even got families. And so in Pharaoh's oppression, things opposite of what he's trying to force on them is happening. Now, I can imagine in this instance, in this story, because we find out with Moses that he was 3 months old when he's put into the basket and put in the Nile, but can you imagine moms, okay? Moses' mom hid him for 3 months. She hid him. She didn't want him to be seen. She didn't want him to be noticed. Can you imagine trying to hide an infant at 3 months old without having them cry or talk too loud or make too much noise? That had to be such a difficult thing. But this is the work of an oppressor. This is a work of the oppressor. Now, in the darkest of days, God is still the great I am. In the darkest of days, God is still the great I am. And Charles Spurgeon said this: God is too good to be unkind, and he is too wise to be mistaken. And when we cannot trace his hand, we must trust his heart. You guys grabbing that? Okay? Charles Spurgeon said this: when we cannot trace his hand, we must trust his heart. I know we've all journeyed into places of darkness before. I know that I talked about a humorous thing at the start of this message, but seriously, like, we have walked into things before that are just horrific. They're hard to deal with. When we look at the climate of our culture, when we look at our own country, we look at other countries that are killing Christians, and there are martyrs right now, more martyrs than ever before, dying for faith, dying for believing in Jesus. And we're like, things are dark, things are bleak, things aren't good. And we wonder, like, God, what are you doing? God, are you at work? God, are you involved here? Now, I can share with you guys from my own stories and my own experiences that God has definitely been at work, that God has been doing something, that God has been moving in real, powerful ways, that he's meticulous about all the things that he's putting together to make wonderful things happen. But there are, in those moments that you know, I've often wondered, God, are you being unkind? You know, are you really practicing the wisdom that you are exceptional in? I mean, I can't trace what you're doing. I don't know what's happening here, God. I don't know where you're leading or what you're trying to accomplish. And so that time was dark. That time was bleak. That time was a difficult time to live within. Now, drawn out from the water, okay? I'm going to start with Exodus chapter 2, and I'm going to start with verse 12, and I'm going to go down to verse 22. Follow along with me, okay? This is how the story continues. I'm working through this, guys. I want you to, like Charles Spurgeon says, you know, we got to trust his heart. As God is working through Moses' story, I want you guys to capture some things, okay? So the work of an oppressor is trying to kill babies. Is trying to kill babies, to destroy, to bring down the numbers of Israel. And so these horrific things are happening. And so, but the more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Israelites multiplied and spread, and the more alarmed the Egyptians became. So the Egyptians worked the people of Israel without mercy, okay? So he's doing all these things. I am reading the same text over again. Is it the same text? Am I reading the same text up there over again? Okay. All right. I'm going to get my Bible because for whatever reason I put the wrong one on there. So just hang with me for a minute. There we go. All right. I'm a little tired. I got a little bit of a toothache. Something happened. The nerve is exposed, and it's keeping me up at night. So not that that's an excuse that my PowerPoint didn't get done right. But anyway. All right. Exodus chapter 2. This is about the birth of Moses. And now the man of the house of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. She hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed it, then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the river bank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. The very babies that her dad said throw into the river to let them die. She suddenly has compassion. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. And the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." She got paid to take care of her own child that did not die as a result of Pharaoh's edict. So the women took Or so the woman took the baby and nursed him. And when the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, I drew him out of the water. I want you guys to think about this for a minute, okay? Now, listen to these statistics, okay? Think about this. So many of us kind of picture or imagine the Nile River being some kind of like timid, little stream kind of thing. But okay, listen to this. The Nile is the second longest river in the world. It's 4,258 miles in length, and the mouth of the Nile River is the Mediterranean Sea. You see, the output of the Nile River, its discharge is 99,940 cubic feet per second. That's 6.2 million pounds of water per second in motion. They didn't just put Moses in this little oh, look, it's like a little stream. Let's see. And Moses just kind of floating along. No. Okay, this was not a little stream. Okay, this was a massive river. She put this basket together, and she's like, okay, I mean, babies were definitely dying when they were put in the Nile, because the Nile was moving so fast, it probably immediately, when a child was thrown, this is horrific just to even think about it. It's so hard for me to even wrap my mind around the fact that this guy was able to sleep at night. Like, he made this edict, and then he went home and he went to bed, and he was just totally chill about it. He was totally okay. He was fine with it. But the sea, or this river, swallowed babies whole immediately. But they made a basket for him, and they put it all together, and they dropped them in the Nile. This 6.2 million pounds of water per second in motion river, they trusted Moses in that, and it floated, all right? It floated to where Pharaoh's daughter was, and she was captivated by the child. She was suddenly given compassion for the child. And the midwives, this woman began to care for him. And she opened the basket, and she saw him crying, and she immediately began to feel compassion for this baby. This woman likely to know everything that her father is doing. This young lady likely to know everything that her father has commanded, knowing that the very Nile River that she's bathing in, think about this, okay? This is horrible, but think about this. The very water that she's bathing in is also a grave for newborn children. That's awful. That's awful to even think about. It's awful. And so, like I said, the darkest of times. And so she's bathing, she sees this basket, she opens the basket. This could have played out totally different. The edict is to kill all the boys. That's definitely a boy. I'm going to drown him right now. No. She was suddenly alerted to him, and her attention was captured, and she loved him, and she had compassion. And then, Moses' sister popped in like, hey, do you need somebody to take care of the baby? Oh, cool. I know someone. I'll go grab somebody. Hey, Ma. That's just so amazing that God in his sovereignty worked that all together. Now, I imagine that later on when Moses had to be given back to Pharaoh's daughter, that had to have been hard. That had been really hard to raise him up to that point and then give him back. But this is something that we need to understand here in this story. I mean, there are horrific things happening, okay? We're talking about leaning in, learning to lean in. We've got to learn to lean into the work of God, even when we don't understand what's going on, even when we don't have a full concept of the reality of it. And so I can imagine. Just put yourself in Israel's shoes, okay? You were brought to Egypt to escape famine, and now you're in Egypt and you're being oppressed. Your children are being killed. How can you even for a moment begin to find any kind of peace in that situation? How could you even for a moment begin to find anything that will alleviate your anxiety and alleviate your stress, alleviate your pain? But this woman who had this child, all right, no, I'm not going to let my baby die. This is the darkest of times, but no, I'm not going to let my baby die. And she might not have had a full scope of understanding of what was happening here, but she had to know, like Pharaoh's daughter rescued my child. This is not something that should have happened. This is strange. This story doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand. I wanted to save him or rescue him, so I put him in a basket. It wasn't her plan. Like, okay, let me put the basket in and hope that it steers just right so that Pharaoh's daughter, who is bathing in the Nile, will see him. No, this is like a Hail Mary, right? This is like her throwing out somewhere and hoping something happens, that her baby lands somewhere so that he's not killed. And so it began to play out. It began to move forward. And things began to change. Things began to change. I mean, Pharaoh is such a vile, awful narcissist who wants to control and control the Israelites, that he's willing to do this. And then suddenly his very daughter is separated. Her heart is suddenly separated from the kind of heart that he has. See, in the darkest of days, do you still see Jesus? That is a question we've got to ask ourselves. In the darkest of days, do you still see Jesus? The answer to that question is where our real miracle is. The answer to that question is where our real miracle lives. What is the darkest of days? Many of us have experienced some pretty horrific things in our life. Like we've experienced things that are traumatic, things that are awful, and things that have caused us to travel through what we felt like was an eternal night where blackness was all around us, and we're like, how am I going to be able to see in what seems like, what feels like pitch black? God, how are you going to work in this? And if you can in those moments still see Jesus, that is the beginning stages of a miracle. That alone is a miracle. That alone is a miracle, that you can see him at work. Not even just seeing him at work, just seeing him there. Just seeing him there. You may not even be able to notice or recognize what he's doing, but just the fact that he is present gives you greater strength and gives you greater courage. And so, just following the story, okay? Following the story, we find Moses now a sojourner, okay? So here's how the story continues. In this part of the text, it's Moses escapes to Midian, okay? Many years later, okay, so Moses, all right, is rescued from a watery grave and taken care of. He's raised in this home. Probably he's taught. They are working likely to indoctrinate him with the same things that they believe, telling him how to oppress the Israelites, even though those are his people. And something happens many years later. When Moses had grown up, he went to visit his own people, the Hebrews. He had to know, all right? He went to visit his own people, the Hebrews, and he saw how hard they were forced to work. And during his visit, he saw an Egyptian beating one of his fellow Hebrews. After looking in all directions to make sure no one was watching, Moses killed the Egyptian and hid the body in the sand. This was not accidental. This wasn't an oops. This wasn't a mistake. He plotted. This was a willful decision. I'm going to kill him, and I'm going to bury him. He was messing with my people, so I'm going to mess with their people, okay? So he buried them. And the next day, when Moses went out to visit his people again, he saw two Hebrew men fighting. Why are you beating up your friend? Moses said to the one who had started the fight. The man replied, who appointed you to be prince and judge? Who appointed you to be our prince and judge? Are you going to kill me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday? Moses was afraid, thinking everyone knows what I did. And sure enough, Pharaoh heard what had happened, and he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in the land of Midian. When Moses arrived in Midian, he sat down beside a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters who came as usual to draw water to fill the water troughs for their father's flock. But some other shepherds came and chased them away. So Moses jumped up and rescued the girls. All right, he jumped up and rescued the girls from the shepherds. Then he drew water for their flocks. All right. When the girls returned to Reuel, their father, he asked, "Why are you back so soon today?" "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds," they answered. "And then he drew water for us and watered our flocks." "Then where is he?" the father asked. "Why did you leave him there? Invite him to come and eat with us." Ladies, daughters, like, that's a guy. That's the guy. That's a kind of guy that you want to find. What are you doing? I mean, he took care of you. He protected you, and then he served you. Where is he? All right. So where is he? Your father asked. "Why did you leave him? Invite him to come and eat with us." Moses accepted the invitation. He settled there with him. In time, Reuel gave Moses his daughter Zipporah to be his wife. And later she gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, for he explained, "I have been a foreigner in a foreign land." In years past, the king of Egypt died, but the Israelites continued to groan under their burden of slavery, and they cried out for help. And their cry rose to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered the covenant promise of Abraham. We talked about this last week, Isaac and Jacob. He looked down on the people of Israel, and he knew it was time to act. Moses was a man raised in the teachings and the ways of the Egyptians. He had experienced a life of comfort. He experienced everything probably that would have made him feel physically eased. I mean, he ate the best, or he drank the best. He was with the best. And suddenly he finds himself so compelled, even years and years after being with the Egyptians, he realizes, those are my people. I'm going to go out and get involved with what's going on with them. And yes, he messed up. His courage was misplaced. His courage drove him to kill somebody and then hide it. But he was courageous no less. He was courageous enough to get involved. Hebrews tells us that he stepped down from his position and lived like those who were enslaved. He put himself in that position. He put himself in that place. And so he finds himself in a place that is not his home. He even names his child after the reality of that. I'm a foreigner. I'm a foreigner. I'm a sojourner. All right? He turned his back on his wealth. He turned his back on his power, on influence, on comforts, you name it. And he chose to be mistreated. He chose imperfection, even with his screw up, and he runs out to Midian. Now, I want you to understand this, okay? I want you to understand God's work. Again, God is at work in the dark. I want you to look at the reality of the situation, okay? Babies are being murdered. Moses is rescued. Moses is raised. He murders somebody, and then he runs for his life and hides. And in the process of all of that, he finds himself someone to live with, a people to live with, and a wife and a child. God is obviously at work. God is obviously doing something, right? He was this elect leader in the house of Pharaoh, and now he was a humble shepherd. All right? I'm not denouncing at all whatsoever that there was no reason for him to experience what he did in the palace. There were things that he learned there, things that he discovered there, things that he knew that would participate in the calling that God had given him. But I do know that in the area of humility, he began to grow. God began to speak to him. There's these moments leading up to that burning bush experience where Moses is becoming more and more humble, realizing his imperfections, noticing his flaws. And it gets to this place. He's continually awakened by the fact that he just cannot handle injustice. And so he gets to Midian, and they're mistreating these girls. And he's like, no, not on my watch. Nope. That is not happening. All right? Now, to me, this is an indication, all right? It doesn't say there was a shepherd, there were shepherds, okay? So I don't know if it was training that Moses got when he was with the Egyptians or what, but this man is likely able to fight. He's got to have some kind of training. He's not afraid. He walks up, and there's not like, oh, okay, big scary man, let's run away. I mean, there were more than him. I mean, there were more of them than him. And he steps up, and he's able to chase them all away. And he protects these young ladies. He protects them because he can't swallow injustice. Something is stirring within him. Something is changing the way that he views the world. Something is changing the way he views things. God is at work in his life. God is at work in his heart. God is beginning to change him as an individual to prepare him for the work that he would do. To prepare him for what God had for him. For what God had for him. And J.R.R. Tolkien says this, not all who wander are lost. Not all who wander are lost. I love it. It's real. That's true. We see this man who seems to be wandering. I mean, he left what he thought was his home. He left what was his life. He left, he ran away, and he escaped. And now he's in Midian, and he's like, what am I doing here? Okay, I rescued these girls. Hey, they came back. They invited me. Okay, sure. Let's go have some food. Let's hang out. Let's meet your dad. It seems all too coincidental. It seems too much of an accident for him to find himself in this situation. But he goes here and he begins to contemplate the things. He begins to see things differently. I know that the scripture doesn't talk about this, but I wish that I understood. I wish that I knew the conversations that he began to have with God as he was a shepherd. I wish I knew the things that he was contemplating, the ways that God was stirring his heart, the way that God was changing him, the way that God was moving in his life, the way that God was doing something. I wish I could know, but I do know this, that there was going to be something that would radically change. That would radically change the way he saw things. So much so that when God spoke to him, he would respond. He would respond. You see, these points seem just disjointed, but they are not. These seemingly disjointed experiences of Moses' life all work together to fulfill God's purpose. They all work together. They're all flowing in motion. There's all something happening. If you look at the entire book of Exodus, if you follow it and trace it, if you look at the history, if you look at the things that are happening in this man's life, if you look at the Egyptian culture and what's happening there, if you look at slavery as a whole, if you take a look at the entire story, you will begin to recognize the fact that God is moving, that God is flowing, that there is an undercurrent of some kind that by our human eyes cannot be seen. And these disjointed events, these disjointed experiences, these random moments that are happening in Moses' life are all working together, are all creating something. As Romans 8:28 says, and we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Are called according to his purpose. Church, listen. Let's listen. I can't imagine in my own life being in a situation of such a horrific genocide. I can't imagine existing there. I can't. I just can't put my mind around that. I can't put my heart in that place. Understanding the climate of that culture, understanding that that man was able to put his head down at night and sleep with what he was the edict that he was giving. I can't imagine that. And I know it was dark. I mean, I can't imagine being raised in that kind of environment and then looking out and realizing those are my people. They're being oppressed. I'm going to live with them. I'm going to exist with them. I'm going to be a part of them. Can you imagine the darkness that Moses felt? Can you imagine the realities? I mean, it was likely that he knew his beginnings. It was likely that he knew that he was hid for 3 months, put in a basket, saved by the daughter, the princess, saved by her, and then given back to his mother, and then taken back by Pharaoh's daughter, and then raised in that home. Can you imagine for a minute the darkness that shrouded his life, the feelings of, what is this? What am I doing? Where am I going? I feel so lost and confused and afraid. I feel like everything around me, I can't make sense of it. It doesn't compute. I don't get it. I just don't get it. And everything was dark. I imagine. Shoot, I killed somebody. I buried him. They know. They must know. Okay, Pharaoh found out. I got to get out of here. All right? Now, I know that he's in a place that's good. I mean, he found himself a good family. He's being taken care of. He's got a wife and he's got a kid. But I can't help but wonder if the reality of what was existing back in Egypt was continuing to bother him. Like, okay, let's tend my flocks. Let's do this. I'm going to hang out with my wife. I'm going to play with my son. And then back there just gnawing in his memory like a highlight reel, remembering the lashings that his people were experiencing. Remembering the sound of the crack of the whip, the brutal statements that were made, the oppressive things that happened to his people. I imagine that he was contemplating those things over and over again, that it was unsettling to him. I can imagine that. It would be like that for me. I think it would be like that for any of us, unless we could completely callous our hearts and remove those things from us. And God was stirring him. Yeah, there was that moment, the burning bush, the moment where God said it's time to go back. Yes, that happens. We're going to talk about that. That's an incredible moment that indeed happens. But before that, did Moses begin to feel like, I got to do something, but I don't know what to do? I've got to do something, but I don't know what to do. I'm confused. And the situation is dark. The situation is lonely. He's broken. And he's likely asking himself, how? Through life in Midian and through years of shepherding and a discipline of daily responsibilities, God is stripping him of pride, stripping him of ego, emptying him of self. And through teaching him to serve without glamour and without glory, God would do something marvelous in him that would change everything about those people. And so instead of asking a question, I want to give you a challenge. I want you to say this in your prayer. Lord, open my eyes. I want you to be deliberate about that. I want you to be deliberate in your heart, in your heart and your mind. God, Lord, give me eyes. Open my eyes. Open my eyes. And we find out later on that Moses' eyes are completely open and he's compelled to go. Well, he's kind of nudged a little bit, but he goes back to his people to set them free. But in all of this, what is he seeing? What is he noticing? What is he not noticing? What is he not recognizing? In all of you guys and what you're experiencing, what are you seeing? What are you not seeing? You may not be in a place of utter darkness. Things might not be completely overwhelming. You might not believe that you're walking or see that you're walking through pitch black darkness, unaware of what's all around you. But there are places or moments or things in your life that you can't see. And instead of leaning in, you're trying to run. And God's saying, hey, lean into me. Lean into me. Trust me. Lean into me. Let me help you open your eyes. Let me help you to see things as they are. Let me help you to notice things as they are. Let me help you to recognize what is real, what is not real. I love this story, and I hate this story. Not because I hate the word, but I love this story and hate this story because I love the work that God is doing in Moses' life, but I hate the reality of the time. It's so overwhelming to me to think about this. It's so overwhelming to me to think about this. And God is at work. God is at work. Where are you today? What is God doing right now? Where is God leading you? What is God taking you out of? What failures or bad decisions or poor moral choices have led you to where you're at now? Like, what is happening in your life? And how can God open your eyes to help you to see what He is doing? How are you going to lean into Him? How are you going to lean into Him? You catching what I'm throwing down? You grabbing it? Okay. 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 We need to have the Lord open our eyes to all the different events that are happening in our life that seem disjointed, but they're working together to fulfill His divine purpose. The most horrific situations that we will find ourselves in just may be the most incredible platforms we find ourselves standing on to reach people, to share Jesus, and to change everything about our life and everything about the lives of those